Hello and welcome to an intro to FreeCAD version 1.0, and for the 10th video in the series I thought we'd take a look at creating a woodworking tool. In the last video we did an exploded view of an assembly, so again we're going to use an assembly for this one. This is going to be a marking tool for woodworking, so it works with basically a pencil and a holder. And then you would hold this end, you slide this up to whatever distance you want that to be. You flip that cam over to lock it down. And then this is a set distance that you can mark on wood. So it's a very useful little tool. I thought we'd do something that we could use, that we can 3D print. And we're going to go through how to design this, how to create the assembly, and how to end up with something printed out that you can use as a marking device. Stay with us till the end and we'll show you how to get everything done, and I'll show you the 3D printed final version. So let's get started. What we're going to do is we're going to model each of these pieces, and we're going to start out with the most simple one, which is this base piece that doesn't move in my assembly. And then we'll create the piece for the pencil, and we'll create this body, which I'm calling the head, and then we'll create our little cam lock. And we'll get it all to lock down, and then we should be all set to go. So as always, in our FreeCAD file, we're going to start a new file, and then we're going to create a part. We're going to create a body. Now I'm going to rename this body. I'm just going to call it bar, because that's what it is. And then I'm going to create a sketch, and I'm going to just do that sketch on the XZ plane. XZ plane. Then I'm just going to create a circle. I'm going to go out from the center, and I want my circle to be 14.8 millimeters in diameter. So we're going to select that, and now what I want is a flat across there. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see. I'm just going to pop a flat piece in here, go here. I'm going to make it horizontal and connected, and then I'm going to give that a dimension from there of 4 millimeters, and I have these dimensions from the design that I created. So obviously if we were doing this from scratch, if I didn't know what it was going to look like, we'd have to establish what those dimensions were going to be, but I already have done this, so I know what the dimensions are going to be. I don't want to go through the whole design and have to procrastinate around the design while you guys are watching. So what I've done is I've already come up with the dimensions, and these are the dimensions I need. You can see my sketch is fully constrained. That's all I'm going to do. So what I try to do whenever I create something is I want that sketch to be as simple as possible. I don't want to overcomplicate it. I don't want to put things on the sketch that I don't need. So I'm going to close that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that sketch and I'm going to pad that. I'm going to make it symmetrical to my plane. And I'm just going to make that 160 millimeters long, because that's how long I want that bar to be. And that's my basic bar shape. That's all there is to it. Now I'm going to put a hole in the end of it, and we'll go from there. So now we're going to create another sketch. This time we're going to be in this XY plane. And we are going to create a hole, and that hole is going to be on the end here. What I'm going to do, I like to just put the hole down, and then I'm going to position it. Now I'm going to use this view section because I want to be able to see through there all the way to the axis. So when I click that button, it's a toggle, so it goes on and off. You'll notice if I zoom in here, you'll notice that I can now see the axis. And so that's what we want to be able to do when we take this circle. And I'm going to give this circle a dimension here. I'm going to call it 11.2 because that's where I want it to start. And then I'm simply going to move that over to here. So I'm going to right click to get off the dimensions. I'm going to click the center of the circle. I'm going to click that axis line, and then I'm going to click this constrain coincident, and that will move it over there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dimension from here I'm going to dimension that distance, and that distance needs to be 72 millimeters, and that'll put it right near the end. That's basically what we want. So I'm going to close that, and now I have a sketch which is sitting over there in my part. And what would be ideal is if we had that sketch sit on top of here. So remember, we went 4 millimeters up, so I can take that sketch, I can change its attachment, and I can change it to 4 millimeters. So if I start changing the Z direction, we should see the sketch appear. And we know that sketch is 4 millimeters, will be sitting right on that surface. And so that's what we're going to do. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this hole. I'm not taking the pocket, I'm taking the hole. And I'm going to click on my sketch, click a hole. And what I want to do is I want to take my dimension here for this one is going to be 11.2. And it's going to be a tapered hole. And it's tapered 3 degrees. So I'm going to do it with an 87-degree taper. And what that'll do, if you look at this hole, if we zoom in here, you can see the top is more open than the bottom. So it's actually tapering down into that hole. So that's what we're going to do. We have our hole all the way through, and it is tapered. So we're progressing nicely with this bar. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some radii on the end just to break the edges. We can do that now. So I can select that whole face right there and just hit radius. And then I'm just going to select, and I'm going to move this thing around. I'm going to select that face to add it, say OK. And now I have a radius on the end. So that's pretty much the bar. That's all there is to it. And so the bar is done. Now a good practice would be to save this file. So I'm going to save as, and I'm going to call it marking gauge. Video for me so that I can find it again. So I'm just going to call it that. You call it whatever you want to call it. So now we have the bar. And that's basically what we're building around. What we want to do next is we're going to build this holder, which is our pencil holder. So we can literally call it that. So I'm going to add a body, and I'm going to right click on there and rename, or I can hit F2 to do that. And I'm going to call this a pencil holder. And then again, we're going to create a sketch. And this time, because it's going to be a revolve, I'm going to create that in this XZ plane again. And I'm going to hit this blue button so that I can see my axis there. Then I'm just going to draw my shape that I want that thing to be. Now, if you think about the shape of it, it's going to have a hexagon through it. So we can't do that with the revolve, but we're going to do the outside shape with the revolve. So I'm going to take a polyline, and I'm going to go along here, and I'm going to go out to here. I'm going to go up to here at a bit of an angle. I'm going to go here. Notice I'm exaggerating everything. I don't have to be perfect because I'm going to add some dimensions to it, and then that will tie it up. So I know the shape is basically this shape. I want to make sure I close that wire. And then I'm going to add some dimensions. So this dimension here, I know I want to be 11.5 divided by 2 because there's only half of it, right? And we'll say OK to that. So that gives me my dimension out there. And then we want to make sure we got our 3-degree angle on the edge. So we're going to go from here to here. And this angle is going to be 93. And that means we got a 3-degree angle popping down this way. We're going to dimension out to this part here. We're going to call that 7.5. That'll give us a little lip. And we want to give this one here a dimension. We're going to call that 2 millimeters. And then we want to give this height. And that's going to be 15 millimeters. And we can close that. So now we have that sketch. What we're going to do is just a simple revolve. So I'm going to revolve that. And there is our piece. And of course, we want a hexagonal hole in the top. So that's the piece we're going to do next. So I'm going to say OK to that revolve because I like that. And I'm going to draw another sketch. And I'm going to draw it in the XY plane. And it's going to be a hexagon. I'm going to use my little blue button again so that I can get into the center point. And my hexagon there. So we're going to go to this diameter. We're going to set it to 8. And then we're going to move into here. And we are going to set this one and this one coincident. So that locks that up. And then I'm just going to close that for a second. And I'm going to do a hole. And I'm going to do it through here. So it's a pocket through all, symmetric to the plane. So now it goes all the way through my pencil holder. And I'm just going to turn off that bar for a second just so we can see all the way through. And so that's now the size that we need to go through for our pencil to go through. And then we just want to cut out a piece out the side here just to make it loose. And so I'm going to do that with a separate sketch. Or I could do it with the same sketch and just expand that. The problem is once I break this hexagon, it'll stop being controlled like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a second sketch. You can do it in one if you prefer. I'm just going to do it with a separate sketch. I'm going to take a box. I'm just going to go from here. Going to go over to here. That's simple. And of course it jumped onto my part there. So I'm just going to take this constraint and delete it. Now I just want to show you that. I want to make clear that I can go in here and I can select that constraint, but I often have problems actually getting it to select properly, especially if it's close to something else. So you can take it from the list. You can just select it over there and hit delete. That will take that constraint off so it's no longer attached there. Then what I want to do is hit my points on the end. So I'm going to select that point, make sure it goes green, select my axis line, and then I'm going to make that symmetrical. And then I want to cut that. I'm going to cut a 4mm piece out of that. So I'm just going to go with a 4mm cut. Now, here's something that's interesting. So if you get close to that line when you select it, it wants to do an angle. So I'm going to cancel that. I'm just going to, when it locks up like this, it says it's over constrained or redundant constraints. I'm just going to refresh. They'll disappear. I'm going to select that line again. I'm going to intentionally stay over this side. I'm not going all the way out here. I'm going just to here, and I'm going to just take it there and make that a 4mm gap. And now the only thing I need to do is to make sure that this part here is not less than 8 or 4 in this case because it's half. So I'm going to make it 1.5. That way it'll keep it the whole way across there. And then this one doesn't really matter. I'm just going to call it whatever it came out at. And I'm going to close that. And then we're going to do the same thing with this guy. We're just going to say symmetrical and through all and say OK. And there we have our pencil holder part. So now that part is going to drop into the bar. So as you can see, we have the bar here. And we're going to drop this into there in our assembly. So then the next piece on this is going to be that what I'm calling the head, which is the big square part. I'm going to turn these other pieces off for a second. And I'm going to turn the bar back on just so you can see the orientation that I create the sketch in. So I'm going to create a new body and I'm going to right click on that, rename it. I'm going to call it head. And then I'm going to make a sketch, and that's going to be in the XZ plane again, because that's where that is. And then I'm going to just draw a centered rectangle. And you can change yours if you would like. I'm doing mine as a centered rectangle. So I'm going to do mine with a 45 by 45mm. You do yours however you would like to do it. I think for me that's plenty big enough. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in and do this exact same shape here, but I'm going to make it a 15mm radius because I want there to be a little bit of clearance. So I'm going to go in here, pop that to the larger size, go 15, and there's my circle. Then I'm going to take a straight line, going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to connect it here, make it horizontal and connect it on that side. So we have our line across the top. Now we're just going to dimension that from that center. And we're going to make that 4.2 just to give us a little bit of clearance. We'll say OK, and you can see there's actually more clearance than maybe we need. We can reduce that if we want to. So let's just take it down to 4.1. Let's just take it down to 4.1. Then we need to just trim the top off that circle. And then the other piece we want in here is a hole at the top there for our pivot. That's going to go all through. And that's going to be 6 millimeters in diameter. And the height of that is 15. We'll say OK. Now I'm just going to turn off that bar so you can see what I have in the sketch. And these are all the through holes. Now you could put your radii on here, or you could add them later. I'm just going to leave mine square for now. I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to pad that. I'm going to do symmetric to plane just because I can. I'm just going to make that 20 millimeters thick. Say OK. And there we have our head part already started. And we need to put a slot in the top of that. So we're going to do that next. And to do that, we want to do it on this XY plane. And it's basically a slot we're going to do. So we're just going to create a rectangle. I hit my blue button again so I can see the middle. I'm just going to put a rectangle in here. Then I'm going to dimension it. So I know that I want that to be 5 millimeters wide, so I can do that first. That's my cam is going to be somewhat thinner than that, so it's got some clearance. Then I know that I want this edge from the center to be 12 millimeters, and I know I want this edge from the center to be only 7 millimeters, so it's an offset. And then I also know that I want this point to be 2 millimeters from the center there. So I'm going to close that. And that's a simple sketch. The reason I am only doing that part and not doing the front cutout part is I want to make sure that the front cutout part goes all the way through and my other piece does not. Now remember, with a sketch in version 1, I could actually sketch both pieces and then say that I want this geometry to go all the way through and the other geometry not to. I prefer not to do that because I want to keep it very simple. And so that's what we're going to do. Now what I'm going to do with this sketch, if we take a look at where that sketch is, you see it's right in the middle there. I'm going to bring it out through the top. So we're going to create a hole or a pocket. We're going to say through all, and we're going to reverse it so that it pops out through all. And now we have the space for our cam to fit in there, and that looks good. So you can see our pivot hole goes through there. And now finally we want to cut out in the front here to clear our pencil holder. So we're going to do another sketch. We're going to do that in the XY plane. And again, I'm going to turn on my blue button so that I can see my axis. I'm going to just take a circle. I'm going to put it on that axis. I am going to give it a dimension. And you probably notice a lot of times I don't actually type in the dimension and all that. I don't think it saves me a lot of time because I'm going to be dimensioning other things anyway. So I just go this way. I want this to be 15.2. If you remember, that pencil piece was 15. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate the center of this over here. I'm going to locate it the half a distance from there, which is 10. Say close. And then I'm going to pocket that, and I'm going to say symmetric to plane. And I'm going to say through all. And there we've cut out that front part. So now we have our head piece is all set, other than radii that we want to add, and we can add those later on. So the next thing we're going to do is this pivot pin. So we'll take care of that. And to do the pivot pin, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new body. We're going to rename that. We'll call that pivot pin. So now for the pin, and with my pin, I am going to use a polyline, and I'm going to create my pin as a revolve. Makes the most sense. And with this polyline, I'm just going to come off the bottom here. So I'm going to just go from here up, go left, come down here, and then we're going to have head on the pin. Again, the dimensions we can fix once we start dimensioning it. I'm going to do that right now. Pick this line. I know I want that to be 13.5 millimeters, and I know I want this one to be 1.5 millimeters, not 14.5 millimeters. Let me just go fix that. 1.5. And then I know I want to make this half the diameter, so I'm going to make it 2.9. Remember, it's going in a 6 millimeter hole. I'll make it 5.8. And I'm going to make this one 4 millimeters, which will give us a nice head on the pin. That's everything we need. I'm going to turn off the bar, turn off the head, so you can see the shape of that. And I'm just going to create a revolve. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to turn off the head, the bar. I'm going to select that sketch and I'm going to create my revolve. And there's my pin. And of course we can put a little leader onto the front there, or whatever we want to do to make it fit together as easy as possible. So we can come back and finish up with all our embellishments when we're ready. So the final part is the cam. So we're going to create a new body. We'll rename that body. We'll call it cam lock. And then I want to just turn the head back on. Perfect. So I can see where my cam is. So you see I did my pin is actually sitting in the middle there. I'm going to turn that off. And so the cam is the only thing that is a little complicated to dimension, but it's not that difficult. What we're going to do, the cam is going to have a hole in it that's going to line up here. So let's start a sketch. Going to do it on this plane, just keeping it lined up. We'll just put a hole in there. And again, we can size our hole here in a moment. And then we're going to do a polyline. And that polyline, we want to come out something like this. And you can make your cam the sort of ergonomic shape that you want it to be. I'm going to go here, and then a straight line to here. And then I'm going to come around here somewhere. Straight line up here. And then we're going to just make a radius here. Now, what I'm doing is I'm using M to change how this polyline works. And you can do that. I'm going to actually just keep that straight, and then I'll add a radius to it in a moment. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to dimension this hole, because we know what that's going to be. That's just another 6 millimeter hole. That's where my pivot pin goes. Then I'm going to dimension the center to that hole. And in this case, I'm going to make it 15.1 because of where my cam is sitting. And then I'm going to give this radius here, I'm going to call that 8 millimeters. And I want to locate the center for that radius, because that's going to be the important part of my cam. So I'm going to give that 11.2. And I'm going to go from this side. I'm just going to make that 2.5. Just to get my cam in the right place. Now, how did I come up with those numbers? Basically, what you want to do is you want to make sure your cam is going to interfere, because the whole point is the cam is going to lock it. And you can see that overlaps a good amount into there. So I think we got a good chance of locking that down. And then for the rest of it, we want to make sure that this is sort of a smooth looking situation. So I'm going to just bring this over here. I'm going to make this part a radius. So I'm going to take that, smooth that, and I'm going to take that and just smooth that. And that gives me my cam shape. So then I'm just going to dimension everything else. And to do that, we want to make sure so we have tangency there. So that's great. And then I need to have an angle. So I think we'll give this front part an angle from here to here. There we go. We're going to give that an angle. I'm just going to allow it to be what it is. I'm going to give this an angle. And I'm going to give these radii. Again, pick that radius. Oh no, this is a radius too. Okay. I'm just locking it down. I'm going to give that a dimension. We're going to give this a dimension. We're going to give this one a dimension. And I have 7 degrees of freedom, so I want to give this a radius. I'm going to give that a dimension. Don't think it really matters how we dimension it. And I've got 5 degrees of freedom. So I need to have a dimension here of that piece. I think I have a straight piece right in there. I'll need to give that a dimension as well. Down to my 3 degrees of freedom now. So the easiest way to figure out where our degrees of freedom are is if we start to move it a little bit, we can see what can actually move. So we need to start locking this down. I'll lock this one to our center. And I'm going to lock this one again to that center. Now we're down to 1 degree of freedom. Look where that might be. It looks like it's over this side. I have that locked. I have that angle. I have that part locked there. All of that is locked. This piece over here is not locked. So what we're going to do, we are just going to lock down this piece to the center. And now we have a fully constrained sketch. I'm just going to turn off the head part again so that you can see the sketch. It's a very complicated sketch, but remember I just picked the dimensions. It doesn't really matter. I just want to lock it down. The only piece that matters for my cam is this hole and this part here. The rest of it's just a bit that you're going to press. So not a big deal. I'm going to close that. And we're going to pad it. And I'm going to make that pad, because it's going in a 5mm slot, I'm going to make it 4.8. Give us just a little bit of clearance. Say OK. And there we have it as our cam lock. So now we have all the parts that we need. And just for completeness, we'll go ahead and we'll model a pencil just so that we can see that in our assembly. So I'm just going to go and get my pencil. So let's do that. We're going to create a pencil. So that body, we're going to rename pencil. And this one really doesn't matter because it's literally just for illustration purposes. I'm going to turn off my cam lock. I'm going to do a sketch. I'm going to do it in the XY plane this time. And it's just a hexagon. That's going to go out to there. And I'm just going to dimension this. And that's going to be 8mm. Now, one thing I want to point out is, depending where you are, your pencils may be different. This is a US pencil, and it fits into this hole. But I don't know, in Europe, your pencils might be different sizes. So you might want to just make sure, measure a pencil, and make sure that you got the right size there. So that's my pencil. And then I'm going to just pad that. My pencil is going to be about 55mm long. So we'll just run that up, 55, say OK. And then, of course, a pencil should have a point. So let's go ahead and we'll make a point. So we're going to go in that XZ plane. And then all we're going to do for that is we are just going to do a revolve and put a point on it. So there's loads of ways you could do this, but it's easy to do it with a little triangle. So I'm probably not even going to dimension it. So I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to pick the angle that I want my pencil to go at. I think there's perfect. Come down to bottom line. Close that up. Then I'm going to create a revolve, which is a groove is basically a subtractive revolve. I don't know why they call it a groove when they call this one a revolve or a revolution. So I'm going to do that. Say OK. And now we've got something that looks like a pencil. And that's going to fit in. You could get all fancy. You could model the lead in the middle. Then when you did this, you'd actually have a lead point on it. But we're doing this for illustration purposes, so we're not going to bother with any of that. Okay, fantastic. Now we have all the pieces that we need to create our assembly. So we'll go ahead and we'll create an assembly. And as always, we're going to use the new assembly tool. So what we do is we go into assembly. And if you notice, mine is laid out maybe different to yours because I have some other workbenches I used to use assembly for. Now I just use this assembly workbench. We're going to create the assembly and then we're going to add the parts in. Now, because this is a fairly simple thing, I'm going to add the bar. That's going to be my first lockdown part. Now, remember, for mine, it automatically makes that locked. When you add your first part, it may pop up and say, do you want to make this the locked part? Say yes, you want that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a pencil holder. I'm going to add the head. I'm going to add the pivot pin. I'm going to add the cam lock. And I'm going to add a pencil. So those are all the pieces that we need in our assembly. And I'm going to say OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start assembling them. So to do that, I'm going to select my pencil holder first. I'm going to move that up. And I'm going to assemble my pencil holder into the bar. So the easiest way to do it is to go through and just turn off the bits that we're not interested in at the moment. I'm just going to do that. I'm going to assemble this into here. I'm going to do it with a cylindrical joint. And the reason is it should be able to spin and it should be able to come in and out. So why not? So we're going to do a cylindrical joint. We're going to select that circle first. And then we're going to select the circle right under here. And that should put our two pieces together, which it does. I'm going to say OK. And now we should be able to lift that out. And we can turn it around. So that is how we expect it to fit. So now we're going to assemble the pencil. I'm just going to turn that on so we can see where it is. What we're going to do is a slide-in joint. I'm going to select slide-in joint. I'm going to pick one of these parts of the hexagon. Doesn't really matter which one I pick. Then once I get it in there, I'm going to revolve it. We're just going to bring it around till it lines up properly. And with all these joints, you would think I could pick two lines with the slide-in joint and that would line it up. But on this assembly, right now anyway, it doesn't do that. So the best way is just to rotate it. I would like to select two and just line it up that way. And we can see how it's lining up. I'm just going to go on top of it so I can see that the angle is correct. And you can bet that it's going to be lining up there at 240. That looks great. Say OK. And remember to say OK with those joints, otherwise you'll pick something else that you didn't want. So now I can slide my pencil down. And I have the pencil assembled into the end. And then we want to assemble the head onto here with another slide-in joint. So to do that, I'm just going to turn the head part on. And I'm going to physically move it out the way so that I can get the joint done properly. And I'm going to pick a slide-in joint because it slides. I'm actually going to pick the center of this. And then I'm going to go in under here. And I'm going to pick this line here. And you can see that's on there. I'm going to say OK. We're going to zoom in. And you can see now I have the head part is actually in position. And we're just going to move it back. I should be able to slide that along there. And if we turn it this way, we should be able to see that this goes all the way up to there. So you can basically get to a, you know, the smallest line. That goes to 0 right there. Which obviously you're not going to mark a line at 0, but you can move it back, and you can see you'll be able to mark anything that's small. Now, with your head shape, you could have made this asymmetric, and you could have made this part longer at the bottom if that's something that you want to do. I typically, when I use these, I typically tilt it over so my line is actually coming across here, so having more on the bottom doesn't help, but it's up to you. So now what we're going to do is we're going to assemble our cam into here. So that should be pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to turn on the pin, and I'm just going to move it up. I'm going to rotate it, and I'm going to move it back. So if we look there, the pin is now back behind the head, and I'm going to do a revolute joint. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to select that circle. Then I want to select right under that head of that pin. So I'm going to just come around here so I can do that. Zoom in there. I want to pick that line right there. I'm going to say OK to that. Now you can see my pin is in place. And you can see the length that we made it. You got a little bit of clearance on this front part, so nothing's interfering. That all looks good. And again, for yours, you could change it so that maybe you have the head on this side, and then you had a little nut on the end of a thread there if you wanted to do something like that. I don't think it's going anywhere, honestly, so I just left it in there. So now what we want to do is we want to make sure that the cam is assembled onto the pin. So we're going to do that. We are going to take the cam lock. We'll turn that on. We'll take the head, and I think the easiest way is going to do a revolute, but we're going to do it to this edge here, because if I try and do it on the pin, it's not necessarily going to be in the right place. So then I would really need to do a slide-in cylindrical joint and allow it to sit on there. So you could do either, but if you want it just to sit there in that position, I think I would do the revolute to here. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take my revolute, going to pick that part of the head. So I'm actually assembling it to the head. And then I'm going to drop this cam in here like that. Say OK. And then I'm going to just check that my cam can move. And it does move, so that's good. And now we want to be able to see inside to see what's going on. So one thing we can do, if we click on our head and go into appearance, underneath all of this, we have a transparency. So I can turn up the transparency, get it to something we want, and close that. And now we can see through and see where our cam is hitting. So if we wanted to check to see, does our cam lift up? It does, but is it lifting up enough when before it hits that edge there? So if I look at that, I'm hitting my edge up here, and I think my cam is actually touching here. So I can also take my bar, I'm going to change its appearance and just make that a little bit transparent too. So then we can see how everything's fitting together. Close that. Now I can see that my cam is actually touching the bar when it's touching over here. So what that tells me is that we need to make that slot a bit bigger. So we can do that. So let's go ahead and we'll go to that slot. Going to go back to my part, go back to the head, back to that pocket that is this one. Pop my sketch open. And I'm going to make this 9. Say OK. We'll close that. And let's see what we have now. So if I go back to my assembly, and one thing you need to do when you do that is your assembly now is no longer the active part. So I need to go back, right click on my assembly and make it the active object. If I don't do that, I can't move the parts anymore. So if for some reason your parts are not moving on their joints, it's probably because your assembly is not the active body. So now I can move that all the way to there. I'm just going to check it's not binding anywhere. I can see there's a gap there. I can see there's a gap there. And I can see that it's off there. So everything looks good there. I think I'm good with that cam design and with that head. Now we did say we want to put some radii on. So let's go ahead and we'll do that. And the reason I left everything till last is I wanted to show you that you can go back and make some changes and everything still looks good. So I'm gonna turn off my assembly, go back into my head part, under my part. I right clicked on here, made that the active object, and I'm going to take the head and I'm going to make that the active body. So now I'm back here, I'm in part design, and I can go, and remember this is transparent now because we upped the transparency, but that's not a big deal. So now I can take this and give it a radius. And I can make it, whatever we think is appropriate. Going to give that on all 4 corners. Don't know if I can reach through on that one. And we'll say OK to that. And now 4 corners have a radius. And then if we want to, from an aesthetic position, we want to maybe put a radius on here. And we can also select this edge, this edge, this edge. And then maybe we can select, now I could select the face, but then it's going to give me radii all around there. And I don't know that I want to do that. So I'm just going to go with the lines. And we'll say OK. Now we have radii all over the place. Now one thing to think about, when we print this, we may have to have support in here for this portion here because of where our slot is, but we're going to print it this way up. We'll print it this way up. That way this part here can print without any support. And everything else looks good. Okay, so that's the head part is in good shape. What you could do also is if you wanted to put a chamfer around that edge there and select that top edge as well. Say OK. That just gives us a lead in for when we're putting our piece on there. So that's good. I'm just going to hit save with that one. And then for our cam, we might want to do some things for that to give it some rounded edges just so that it feels a little bit better on your fingers. Let's see what we can get away with here. So we'll take the cam, we'll make the cam the active body. I'll select this face, give that a radius, and then we'll also select that face. So there's our cam. Now our cam has some rounded edges to it. And I'm not gonna take the time to go and do all of this stuff for you. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let you play with it, and you can change it, make it whatever you like. I'd love to see it once you've done it. Of course, we're gonna 3D print it now. So we're gonna take one more look at our assembly, make sure everything looks good there before we 3D print it. I'm gonna turn on the assembly. Actually, I'm gonna turn off the part, turn on the assembly. And here's a good example of why you put everything in the part. So now for me to turn all these things off, I can just turn the part off or the part on. And if all of these individual pieces are on, if all of those are on, I can go into the part and just turn them all on, turn them all off. So they are now all off. And we are looking at the assembly. And here on the assembly, you can see one thing that happened because I put a radius on this edge here. We lost that joint, so that broke it. And it's understandable because we had created a joint on an edge that is no longer there. So we could do two things. We could go back and take those radii off and then only radius the outside edge, or we can leave it where it is and I can go in and fix that joint. So let's do that. And that joint I can show by hitting that edge. I just want to make sure that's the right joint. Yep, it's this joint here. So I'm going to delete this joint completely. I am going to click on that cam and I'm going to make my assembly the active object. Gonna double click on the cam, move it out of the way for a second. And then before I do anything else, I'm just going to solve my assembly just to make sure all the bits are where they should be. Now I'm going to double click on my cam lock and I'm just going to line it up roughly this way around. Something like that. And then this time I think I am going to do my cylindrical joint. So I'm going to go back into assembly, going to make sure my assembly is my active object, and I'm going to create a new joint with this edge and this. And now that is in place and it should be able to go back and forth. And of course we can limit its ability to go back and forth. So we're going to say okay to that first. And we're just going to make sure that that moves. Beautiful. And then of course we could set the limits for it. So we could say lock it this way and lock it from this, back and forth. I'm not going to do that because there's no need. I can see that it works the way we want it to. It's moving along. It's moving along. When I'm turning it, it's moving along the piece there. So let's just fix that. I'm going to make that min and max length. So now it shouldn't be able to move back or forth. So by stopping it moving back and forth there, I can check that that lock works. All looks good. So we are ready to go. Now we can go ahead and print it. And to print my parts, I'm literally just going to export. So I can export from my assembly if I want to, but I prefer to go back to my part. I'm going to make my part the active object. I'm going to pick the head and I'm going to turn on my part. I'm going to turn off my assembly. So now I can see all my parts. I'm going to select the head so I can see it selected. File, export. So we're going to export it here. It's my first part. And then I want to export my bar. So I'm going to select that. File, export. When you're exporting, just make sure that you've picked STL mesh. Or if you prefer to print it as something else or save it as something else and put it in your printer as something else, you can do that. So I'm going to create all the parts and just make sure that they're selected before you try to do the export. Now I have all my pieces ready to go. And we are good to go. Of course, I'm not going to 3D print a pencil because I already have a pencil. And once we've done that, I use the Prusa slicer. I just want to show you the head part, how I'm going to orientate that. So in the Prusa slicer, I'm just going to add a part, going to add the head. And if I zoom in here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say, make this the bottom part. And I'm going to print it in that orientation there. And when I slice it, okay, so when trying to do this slicing, I found there are some errors with the model based on the fillets. It looks like they're causing, I'm showing you an extreme case of it right now, but this last fillet I just put on caused the model to get weird artifacts, and those artifacts are not going to allow us to 3D print it, of course. So I'm going to delete those fillets off, and I'll show you what I did to get those fillets to work. So I'm going back to no fillets on the outside. So I'm going to show you what I did just to make it work, because I was getting like a weird artifact here, and then in the slicer it was saying there are errors in the model and it couldn't print the whole thing. So let me just show you that, because you may run into that problem. If you do get errors in your model, a lot of times it is the finishing parts. That's why we always recommend that you put the fillets and chamfers on last, because you don't want to have them be an issue for you. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm just going to add my radii on the back. That seems to work fairly well, and I'm going to just check around to make sure there's nothing that looks weird with that. That all looks good, and I'm going to leave that chamfered around that hole too. And then on this front side, what I noticed is if I go this way and I put a radius on there first, so I'm just going to say okay to that back side. So I'm keeping them separate, and I'm just going to put the radius on here first. And I'm going to add the other side, just say okay. And now if I add a fillet to this edge, and I can say okay, and I think I get away with that, and I don't have any issues in terms of the model being broken. So what we're going to do, just to test that, I'm going to take that head, I'm going to export it, I'm going to save. I'm going to go back into my slicer. I'm going to just delete that model. I'm going to import the model that we just did. So that's this one. And I'm going to check down here just to make sure there are no errors with this model. So it says no errors detected. So I think we're in good shape now. So just be aware that that may be an issue for you. I was quite surprised, first time I've ever seen that error. And now we've got it, we can slice this guy. And I have my support, auto support generated on. And if you look, it actually isn't generating any support. So I think it's a good print. You can go ahead and print that just like that one. So I just want to show you that part for the orientation. The rest of it is pretty obvious how you're going to orient it to get it printed. And then you can print all the parts, and then you'll be able to see it, and it should look something like this. So if you haven't subscribed already, please give us a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button, it's free, doesn't cost you anything, and then you'll know when the next video is coming out. If you have any suggestions, anything you'd like to see, let me know. If you want to buy us a coffee, you can on coffee.com. Or if you want to give us a super thanks, you can certainly do that too. I appreciate that when people do that. It's always nice to receive that. It helps me, keeps me incentivized to keep the videos coming. I appreciate it. I appreciate your support, and I'll see you in the next one.